You have a hard time to get your vocals to sound big with definition and presence without them sounding abrasive or too harsh. Maybe you're struggling to get your drums cut through a dense mix. I know I had these challenges for many years. That's why today I'll show you 6 pro-level mixing tips to overcome some of the most common problems in modern mixing. Nowadays, heavily produced musical genres such as rock, pop, EDM, and metal have such a dense sound that we need to develop new strategies to reach that in-your-face, polished, pro sound we're all striving for. So let's get right into it. One of my favorite tips for drums to be able to poke through a wall of sound is parallel distortion, and especially on closed microphones. So for example, kick, snare, and toms. So in this case, I'm using crush station. Here, the drum kit distortion bus is deactivated. So we'll play the section one time, and then we'll play it again with the distortion engaged.
Raise a feeling as if flesh and blood. Lay my favorite cup for everyone. Apostasy, I need to rethink it. Some more fucking rules. Raise a feeling as if flesh and blood. Lay my favorite cup for everyone. Apostasy, I need to rethink it. Some more fucking rules.
If you listen to the parallel drum bus in solo, you're gonna see that it doesn't sound that good. It's actually good once it's blended with the rest of the drum sound. So before setting it up, what you're trying to look for is some grit, basically in the mids. You have to be very careful with lows here because it can overwhelm your mix very quickly. So for that, use a filter before or after your distortion plugin. The best way to gauge how much of that parallel distortion you're gonna need for the drums to poke through your mix is to start with no distortion at all. So what we'll do is we'll slowly bring up the fader to see how much of that we need. So you're gonna feel the kick and snare and also toms at the very end that start to poke out of that mix, and then we'll back off. So always go incrementally, and then as you see it's a little bit too much, you just back off just a little bit.
Raise a feeling as if flesh and blood. Lay my favorite cup for everyone. Apostasy, I need to rethink it. Some more fucking rules. Raise a feeling as if flesh and blood. Lay my favorite cup for everyone. Apostasy, I need to rethink it. Some more fucking rules.
So don't push the drive too far, otherwise you're gonna lose transient information. Cut the low end just a bit, and if you don't have EQ settings in your distortion plugin, simply add an EQ before or after the distortion plugin in your channel. So to route properly parallel distortion, what you can do is send all your kick sounds to a kick bus, all your snare sound to a snare bus, and all your toms to one tom bus, and send all these buses to the parallel distortion channel, and then you can have a drum sum channel where all your kick, snare, toms, drum kit, raw drum kit sound, and distortion bus are routed to. Here I'm using Eventide Crush Station, and this distortion plugin is very flexible. First, you have a drive setting and grit, so these are two different distortion algorithms, and you can also have control over sustain, which is very useful to get only your transient information and not so much of the sustain. And in this case, you also have an EQ built in, so you can really tweak it without having the need to load another EQ before or after. What's so nice with parallel distortion is that you can basically customize the amount of saturation and upper harmonics for your sound to be able to stick out as much as you want. So you can use that same specific strategy on vocals. Let's check it out. One of my favorite mixing tips of all is to use parallel distortion on vocals because it really helps bring presence, details, and this crisp sound without necessarily sounding abrasive or harsh. So in this case, I'm using again the plugin Crush Station by Eventide with the preset All the Details. And I'm also adding a de-esser right after it to get rid of that sibilance. So let's listen to the chorus without the parallel distortion engaged. So you can hear that when the parallel distortion channel on vocals is muted, you're missing this in-your-face type of sound. And as I bring it up, you hear more and more presence. You have to be very careful, because if you push it too hard, then it's going to sound like the vocals are sitting outside of the mix. So that's not what you want. So again, you bring it up slowly, and once you reach the point where you notice it too much, you just back off just a little bit. So let's listen to the parallel distortion bus in solo to show you the type of distortion that we're using here.
Just bare life ungodly, just don't kiss lying saucer.
So you can see that the grid setting is almost at maximum, while the drive setting is at 0, because the drive setting is more like an aggressive hard distortion. In this case, I want more a subtle saturation to bring only the upper harmonics without getting this aggressive grain. You can also see that there's an option for octaves in that plugin, which is pretty crazy. So if you feel that you're missing some thickness in the low end, you can add lower octaves, or you can add upper octaves, or even a blend of both. So let's see the possibilities as a creative effect here.
Just bare life ungodly, just don't kiss lying saucer. Died and glossy brains, just bare life ungodly, just don't kiss lying saucer.
So in this specific arrangement, I already had a vocal stack with high, mid, lows, and even screams in the background. So I didn't really need the octave function of the parallel distortion plugin. But in a case where you have only, let's say, 1 track or 2 tracks, this can be really, really cool to help bring some low-end energy. Now that most people are operating from a small studio or a home studio, it's really not uncommon to receive drum tracks with not really good sounding room mics. So a way to get around that is to use a fake room simulation using your overheads routed in a room plugin, room reverb plugin. So in this case, I'm using Eventide T-Verb, which is absolutely crazy. So let's see how my drums sound like without that fake room plugin. So you can see how much more life and vitality we're getting from this room reverb plugin. So what I'm doing is simply routing the overhead bus in this fake room bus using T-Verb from Eventide. And here we have a choice of close, of mid, or far room mics. And you can basically dose how much of each you want. You can also compress, you can gate, you can even EQ. So in this case, what I did was simply to mute the close room, since the room was already very small, and also mute the far room, which was a little bit too loose for my liking. But you can still gate it and tweak it and make this complex reverb sound with it. But in this case, I'm simply using the mid-level room. So let's hear the overheads bus in solo without any fake room sound. So you can hear that what helps the most the overhead in this case would be to use mic number 2 here, which would be the mid-sized room emulation. So let's hear the full drum bus and see how this really helps the situation.
Just
One really common problem when we're receiving drum tracks is also to get some weird ringy sounds on toms and also snare that you want to control. So in this case, we have Split EQ by Eventide that allows us to independently EQ tonal and transient content, so that can really narrow down the frequencies that are not really pleasing to the ear, and can really filter and cut what's not needed, and also enhance what you're actually looking for. Let's say transient information, the snap on the toms and snare. So let's listen to how it sounds without split EQ engaged. So in this case, if you're playing the drum bass by itself, you hear that it's missing a bit of definition. Maybe the toms are a little bit too ringy. So what you can do is isolate and see the lower mid muddiness, and you basically take it out, and you can also bring up the upper frequency content, but not just everything, only the transient information, so that you keep your tonal information under control. So let's see how we can actually tweak that under the microscope. So Split EQ by Eventide is absolutely insane because it's so flexible, and it can save you from using a bunch of different plugins to achieve the same result. So in this case, we could have used, let's say, a transient shaper to get that attack to stick out, and we would need to use a regular EQ to basically cut the low mids, but doing that, you're also losing the impact on your lower mids. So in this case, you're preserving the low mid impact while removing a bit of the resonance from the tom bus. And you can use this EQ creatively on basically any other sound source to cut resonances that you don't want and to get a bit more transient where you need. For example, guitar pick attack without getting abrasive upper mid-range harsh tonal elements. One of my favorite tips to achieve bone-crushing guitar tones for rock and metal is to do tone layering, meaning that you're taking one DI signal, sending it multiple times, for example, using different amp heads, different cabinets, and things like this. So you can basically get multiple tones from one single DI track. The problem with that is, since it's the same track, you can have a problem with phasing. That's where the Eventide Precision Time Align comes in. You can have all your tracks lined up perfectly and in phase. So here I have my guitar tracks. I made sure to add a click when I reamp. So for example, a click from a metronome, so that when you're re-recording the reamp signal, you make sure that you can slide it back to the original position, because every time you're going to reamp, it's going to introduce a slight delay. If you listen to the original reamp signal, you're going to see that it sounds pretty weird. There's something hollow in the sound that is not right. One really good trick to make sure that your reamp tracks are phase aligned is to flip the phase and to move the cursor, moving the samples until you almost lose the signal. That way there's going to be almost total phase cancellation, and then push it back again, and then you're going to feel like everything is back in its place. So what happens when phase relationship is partially canceled is you're going to hear a hollow sound. You're going to have something irritating to the ear. So let's listen to it with phase inverted. you can see that we get this weird phasey sound when precision time align is turned off. So that's a really good way to stack tones without getting this phasing problem. You can do the same exact trick when you're stacking samples for kick, snare, toms, or even when you're duplicating bass tracks to create different type of tones, different type of distortions. So this comes very handy to make sure you don't lose the low end and the punch in your mix. Making sure to have good phase coherence is really the secret to have punchy mixes, because no matter how you EQ, for example, your bass tracks, if they're out of phase slightly, you're gonna miss a lot of low end and a lot of punch. So there's no way to go around that. One of the toughest challenges to overcome in modern mixing is to achieve massive sounding vocals, but sometimes you're going to be stuck with only one lead vocal track and you still have to achieve this sense of width and space. That's where the Eventide H910 comes in. So in this case, I routed my vocals to an aux send with the H910. Right now it's muted, and then I activate as the track goes on. And with the full mix, if we listen to the H910 bus in solo, you're gonna hear how it sounds like what it's adding to the vocals bus mix. If I remove it, so this processor by Eventide is taking a mono vocal track and it's basically doubling it, pitch shifting it up and down, and also time shifting it forwards and backward. So this is creating the illusion of width, which is very, very useful. And again, the best way to use it is to add it in a send and put it to 0 and increase to the desired amount. You can hear in the chorus of the song that there are a lot of vocal effects, and the goal was really to create a dark and weird mood to it. But the big pitfall here is that you can really drown your lead vocals in effects and lose definition. So the best trick that I have for that is to use a compressor such as the Eventide Omnipressor to duck when your lead vocal comes in. So let's see here, we have all our vocals being sidechained here, sent to that bus, and it's activated right here. We have about 2:1 ratio, pretty long release time to make sure that we leave enough time for the main vocals to go through, and standard attack time. So you have to make sure that the sidechain is on, that the sidechain is actually loaded here, and that you already click here the sidechain function. Just bear life ungodly. I just don't kiss lying saucer. Tight and glossy brains. Just bear life ungodly. I just don't care. So you can hear that when the compressor is activated, we do not lose the main vocals, and as soon as I turn it off, it gets drowned in the tails of the delays and the reverbs, because the goal was to have this immersive sound. But the problem is, every time there's going to be a delay, you're going to have decay sound, which is going to basically eat your main vocals, and the compressor is preventing it to do that. So for the amount of compression, you really have to go to taste, but in this case, it's around 4 to 6 dBs on each channel. It really depends on what's being fed in the delays and the reverbs. So this is being applied on the half note delay, quarter note delay, 8 note delay, and also on the reverb. So every time the main lead vocals comes in, it's basically cutting the effects just a bit from, let's say, 2 to 6 dBs. I have one last bonus tip for you. Basically, one thing with delays is they're very, very useful to create the sense of space, but the problem is sometimes they're coming in a bit too rough with too much attack, and even if you're cutting the lows, the highs, stuff like that, it still comes in a little bit too harsh. And one good trick that I use is to use the black hole reverb by Eventide after my delay. So let's see how it sounds like when I turn off all the reverbs after my delays in the chorus of that song.
Light and glass and rings just bare. Life ungodly, I just don't kiss lying saucer. Light and glass and rings just bare. Life ungodly, just don't kiss lying saucer.
So you can see that when black hole is deactivated, we're really losing a sense of space and width, and we're also more distracted by the pokey transient information from the delays. So this really helps give a sense of lush and smoothness to your vocals. If you have more tips like that, drop them in the comments below, smash that like button, subscribe and share with your friends, and see you in the next video.